So we begin with the breaking news. A fresh trade war between the US and China has just kicked off.
The Panama Canal is vital to our country. It's being operated by China.
Donald Trump has issued a fiery warning to China, get out of Panama. This bold statement has sent shockwaves through global politics, reigniting tensions over one of the world's most critical trade routes. With China expanding its influence and investing heavily in Panama, Trump's declaration has sparked questions about U.S. interests in the region. Could this escalate into a major geopolitical showdown? Is Trump pushing to reclaim control of the Panama Canal? Stay tuned as we break down this high-stakes confrontation and its potential global impact. The Panama Canal history. For centuries, the idea of connecting the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans through Panama has played a critical role in shaping global trade and national security. As far back as the 16th century, people were discussing how this narrow strip of land, separating the Caribbean Sea to the north and the Pacific Ocean to the south, was the perfect spot for a waterway. If you look at the map, Panama stands out as the most logical place for such a project. With the growth of global trade networks, the demand for a canal skyrocketed. Ships needed a faster and safer way to move between the oceans. At the time, colonial powers, especially Spain, which had conquered Panama in 1510, were eager to find a way to trade with the Pacific coast of the Americas. Sailing around the southern tip of South America was not only incredibly time-consuming, but also extremely dangerous due to rough seas and unpredictable weather. However, building a canal in Panama was far beyond the technological capabilities of the 16th century. The Atlantic and Pacific Oceans may only be about 50 miles apart here, but the terrain poses enormous challenges. The land was rugged and elevated in places, particularly at the Culebra Cut in the south, which reached a height of 360 feet. Excavating such a massive stretch of land with basic tools like shovels was an impossible task at the time. Centuries later, things began to change. Spain lost its empire in the Americas, and new powers, particularly the United States, began to rise in the region. For the U.S., the lack of a canal became a major economic and national security issue. Without one, ships traveling between the East Coast and the West Coast had to take a treacherous 8,000 nautical mile journey around South America. A canal would save significant time and resources. The Industrial Revolution introduced advanced tools and machinery, making the project seem more feasible. But even then, the U.S. knew how difficult and expensive the canal would be. As a temporary solution, they built a railway. The Panama Railroad, completed in 1855, allowed goods to be transported across the isthmus without the need for ships to sail the long southern route. This railway, located near where the Panama Canal now exists, was a vital link for early U.S. development, especially for states like California. However, building it came at a great cost, around $8 million, and the lives of 5,000 to 10,000 workers, many of whom died due to harsh conditions and diseases in the tropical environment. Despite the success of the railway, the idea of a canal in Panama faced stiff resistance. Initially, the U.S. considered building it in Nicaragua instead. On paper, Nicaragua seemed like a much better option. The country was wider than Panama, but its terrain was far less challenging. A massive lake, Lake Nicaragua, sat in the middle, which could form a natural part of the canal. Additionally, a river, the San Juan, connected the lake to the Caribbean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. West of the lake, only a narrow strip of land, about 12 miles wide, separated the Pacific. Unlike Panama, the elevation changes in Nicaragua were gentler, making construction easier. Nicaragua also seemed politically more stable and reliable than Panama, which was still under Colombian control at the time. In 1835, the U.S. Senate even passed a resolution declaring Nicaragua the preferred location for a canal. However, the project never moved forward. Over time, Nicaragua became politically unstable, and British influence in the region complicated matters. Meanwhile, in Panama, ambitious plans for a canal were still being drafted, and the dream of bridging the two oceans would eventually become a reality. But could there be any possible obstacle facing the construction of the canal? Let's take a closer look. Failure of Panama Canal construction. In 1881, a group of ambitious French engineers and investors set their sights on an enormous challenge: building the Panama Canal. Inspired by their earlier triumph in Egypt, where the Suez Canal had been completed in 1869, they believed they could replicate their success. The Suez Canal had transformed global trade, linking the Mediterranean Sea with the Red Sea, and by extension, the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. This shortcut eliminated the need for ships to navigate the long and dangerous journey around Africa. The Panama Canal seemed like a similar opportunity, promising not only to revolutionize trade, but also to bring enormous profits. To get started, a newly formed French company struck a deal with Colombia, which controlled Panama at the time, to develop the canal. Back in France, a skilled diplomat managed to rally an astounding 800,000 investors, raising the equivalent of billions of dollars in today's money. It was pitched as the investment of a lifetime, with promises of returns rivaling those of the Suez Canal. However, the grand dream quickly turned into a nightmare. Panama's harsh tropical environment proved to be a brutal adversary. The sweltering heat, relentless rain, and dense forests were teeming with venomous snakes, spiders, and insects. The deadliest threats, however, were tropical diseases like yellow fever and malaria, which claimed the lives of thousands of workers. Landslides caused by heavy rainfall repeatedly destroyed progress, turning completed sections into rivers of mud. To make matters worse, Panama's mountainous terrain made excavation far more difficult than anything the French had faced in Egypt. The original plan to construct a sea-level canal required an astronomical amount of digging, particularly at the Calabar Cut, a section of the route that sliced through the highlands. The challenges proved insurmountable. By 1889, after 8 grueling years, the French company was bankrupt. Over 22,000 workers had died, and hundreds of thousands of investors lost their money. In 1894, another French company took over the project and proposed a different approach. Instead of a sea-level canal, they envisioned building an artificial lake in the middle of Panama by damming the Chagres River. This lake would be connected by a system of locks that would lift ships up and down the varying elevations, like a staircase for vessels. The locks would be powered by electricity generated from the dam. It was an innovative idea, but the new company failed to gain the trust of investors. By 1898, funding had dried up, and the project stalled once again. At this point, the United States stepped in. The U.S. government, under President Theodore Roosevelt, saw the canal as a vital strategic and economic asset. Roosevelt abandoned earlier plans to build a canal in Nicaragua and turned his attention to Panama. In 1902, the U.S. purchased the French assets and began negotiations with Colombia. However, these talks broke down when Colombia rejected the U.S. proposal to lease the canal zone for $10 million up front and $250,000 annually. Undeterred, Roosevelt played hardball. He quietly supported Panama's independence movement, and in 1903, Panamanian rebels declared their independence from Colombia. The U.S. Navy was deployed to prevent Colombian forces from reclaiming the territory, and within days, the U.S. officially recognized the new nation of Panama. The newly formed Panamanian government eagerly signed a deal with the U.S., granting them control of a 10-mile-wide canal zone. With the political hurdles cleared, the real work began, and it was no less daunting than before. Roosevelt placed engineer John Frank Stevens in charge, who proposed a design similar to the French plan, using an artificial lake and a lock system. The U.S. built the massive Gatun Dam, which created Gatun Lake, one of the largest man-made lakes in the world. 6 lock systems were constructed, 3 in the north and 3 in the south, allowing ships to navigate the canal's varying elevations. Despite these innovations, the construction was grueling. Workers faced constant threats from landslides, such as the infamous Cucaracha slide of 1907, which killed many and delayed progress. However, the Americans learned from the French failure. They implemented strict measures to combat diseases, bringing in doctors and medical experts who successfully reduced the death toll. While nearly 6,000 workers lost their lives, a tragic number, it was far fewer than the French casualties. After a decade of relentless effort, the Panama Canal was completed in 1914. It became one of the greatest engineering achievements in history, forever changing global trade and cementing the United States' role as a major world power. What began as a bold dream fraught with setbacks and heartbreak ultimately became a triumph of human ingenuity and determination. So how was the Panama Agreement reached? Let's find out. Panama Canal Treaty. Over the years, the Panama Canal has proven to be one of the most significant waterways in the world. It played a massive role in boosting economies across the globe, especially in the US, Asia, and Europe. During both World Wars, it was a crucial route that allowed the US and its allies to move ships, troops, and equipment across the world efficiently. While this was a great achievement for global trade and strategy, Not everyone was pleased, particularly the people of Panama. For Panamanians, the canal came at a cost. They felt the deal that handed over control of such a large portion of their land to the U.S. was unfair. Essentially, their country had been split in two and overseen by what felt like a foreign colony. In response to the criticism, the U.S. made some changes. Treaties in 1936 and 1955 returned some surrounding lands and waters to Panama, raised wages for local workers, and handed control of key ports like Colón and Panama City to the Panamanian government. Yet these changes didn't fully satisfy the growing desire for independence. Inspired by the global anti-colonialism movement, Panama wanted full sovereignty over the canal. Years of intense debates followed, leading to a historic moment in 1977 when U.S. President Jimmy Carter signed the Panama Canal Treaty. This treaty marked a turning point. After a 20-year transition, the U.S. would hand over complete control of the canal and the surrounding canal zone to Panama. The move made Carter highly popular in Panama, where he is still remembered fondly. Following his recent death, Panama's president expressed gratitude, calling Carter the leader who made their nation truly sovereign. However, Carter's deal came with conditions outlined in the 1977 Neutrality Treaty. It ensured that the canal would remain open to all nations, with equal tolls, and granted priority access to U.S. and Panamanian Navy ships during wartime. It also prohibited foreign military installations in Panama and mandated that the canal be run fairly and efficiently for the benefit of global trade. Despite these agreements, the treaty has faced criticism in recent years. Former U.S. President Donald Trump argued that Panama violated the treaty, citing issues such as rising toll costs and increasing Chinese influence in the region. He believed the treaty was poorly negotiated, calling it a giveaway that weakened U.S. influence. Panama Canal economic issues. Panama's economic success over the past 30 years has been nothing short of remarkable. The country's economy has consistently performed well, with periods of double-digit GDP growth. Today, Panama boasts a GDP per capita of nearly $20,000, earning it a high-income status on the global stage. Much of this prosperity can be attributed to the Panama Canal, which Panama not only owns, but also operates profitably. The canal has undergone significant upgrades in recent years. A new lane with larger locks was added to accommodate bigger ships, while the older systems were modernized. These efforts have helped maintain the canal's crucial role in global trade. However, despite these achievements, modern-day challenges surrounding the canal are creating tensions, particularly with the United States. Former President Donald Trump has even suggested a U.S. takeover of the canal due to emerging disputes. One of the main issues revolves around the economics of the canal. Every year, around 15,000 ships pass through the canal, transporting goods between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. A staggering 74% of this cargo is either headed to or coming from the United States, accounting for 40% of U.S. container traffic. However, American companies must pay hefty tolls to use the canal, and these tariffs have been steadily increasing. In 2022, the average toll for crossing the canal was approximately $54,000, but costs vary significantly based on the size and type of vessel. For example, a medium-sized tanker pays nearly $300,000 per crossing, while a large gas carrier may shell out over $500,000. These are the costs for companies lucky enough to secure a transit slot, as the limited number of slots means that up to 30% are sold through auctions. In 2023, a record-setting $4 million was paid for a single slot at auction. The rising tolls are partly due to operational challenges. The canal relies on about 52 million gallons of fresh water for each ship to pass through its locks. Drought conditions in recent years have led to lower rainfall, causing Panama to limit the number of available transit slots. Officials have cited water shortages as the reason, but some critics argue that this explanation doesn't fully hold up. While Panama has experienced drier years, the data shows that these conditions aren't particularly unusual. Some suspect that the restricted supply of transit slots is a strategic move to drive up prices. Financial reports from the Panama Canal Authority support this theory, showing that the canal generates far more revenue than it costs to operate. In 2024, the canal brought in $5 billion in revenue, with more than 60% of that going directly to Panama's national treasury. Another $257 million was contributed indirectly through taxes and fees. For a country with a GDP of $83 billion, These canal profits are a significant source of income. With such high stakes, the future of the Panama Canal is a topic of growing international debate. The canal's history might appear clear, but could new economic and environmental problems, along with increasing tensions, change its importance in global trade and politics? Let's dive deeper. China's presence in Panama. What's adding to Trump's anger is China's involvement in Panama. China is one of America's biggest rivals, and now it's gaining influence in a key location on Washington's continent. China has used its economic power to persuade Panama to join its Belt and Road Initiative. In fact, Panama was one of the first countries to join in 2017. Panama was promised infrastructure projects like bridges, a rail line, commercial ports, and a cruise terminal. While some of these projects were canceled, which reflects the overall failure of the initiative, one project stands out. It involves the Panama Canal, where a group of Chinese companies, led by Landbridge Group, struck a deal to build a container port on Margarita Island. This port would be on the Atlantic side of the canal, significantly boosting the capacity for shipments. The project was initially promised a $900 million investment, and in return, the Chinese companies would own part of the port. While construction is still ongoing, it hasn't gone as planned. This might seem good for Panama as it gains more infrastructure for its economy, but there's a major issue. These Chinese companies are not truly private. Many Chinese companies like these have links to the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, with party members in the company who can influence or block decisions. In fact, the CCP can take control of the company if there's a national security risk. Even more concerning is that Landbridge has support from the Chinese military, the People's Liberation Army, PLA. The PLA has even set up a militia inside this company. If these companies control a vital facility at the Panama Canal, it could pose a serious national security risk for the U.S. A PLA presence at the canal could threaten U.S. businesses and naval ships during wartime. Worryingly, two other ports at the Panama Canal are already controlled by a Hong Kong-based company called Hutchison Ports. This company has leased the Pacific port of Balboa and the Atlantic port of Cristobal since 1999 and recently renewed the lease. While Hong Kong is technically independent from China, Hutchison is increasingly under pressure from the CCP to align with China's interests. The CCP would likely try to take control of this company to control the crucial canal passage. Trump is very upset about China's involvement, saying that China now runs the Panama Canal, even though the U.S. gave it to Panama, not China. In December, he even wished Merry Christmas to the wonderful soldiers of China who are illegally operating the canal. There's no proof that soldiers are there, but given the presence of Chinese and Hong Kong companies in the area, it wouldn't be shocking. The president of Panama dismissed these claims, calling them nonsense. He insists that only Panamanian hands are running the canal and that it will stay that way. However, his comments may be influenced by China. It's also important to consider Panama's growing political ties to China. In 2017, Panama broke ties with Taiwan to recognize Beijing instead. The following year, Chinese President Xi Jinping visited the country. Panama's economic dependence on China is a big reason behind this. China is Panama's largest export market, with Panama selling $1.3 billion worth of goods to China in 2023, especially copper ore, which is in high demand in China. A Chinese company even bought stakes in a copper mining company in Panama. Meanwhile, Panama imports $1.8 billion worth of goods from China annually, including electronics, machinery, vehicles, and steel. Panama also imports a lot of Chinese goods indirectly through the Cullen-Free Zone, one of the largest free trade zones in the world. If you include this, China is Panama's largest trading partner, exporting $11.2 billion worth of goods to the country in 2022. If Panama depends so heavily on China, it could become a liability if tensions between the U.S. and China rise, potentially leading Panama to shift its alliances. What do you think about Trump's warning to China to evacuate the Panama Canal? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe.